Hey everyone, thanks for checking out my channel, Don't Waste Your Life, where we remind you to be present, to be happy, and to be thankful. This is my second entry in our book review series, and I'm going to do things a little bit differently this time. I'm going to break it into 2 books into 2 different sessions. However, within each of these sessions, I will make sure to call out in a link to get to the other session if you're interested. Both these books are amazing. The first session will cover Multipliers by Liz Wiseman, and the second will cover Upstream by Dan Heath. I've included links to buy the books in the sessions if you're interested in purchasing. I will not be going into a deep dive into both of these books because I feel like in order to do that, you'd actually have to read it yourself. So I recommend purchasing and checking it out. While these books cover 2 very different topics, they both have had a personal impact on the way I approach work and business. I want to introduce the second book in the book series that we're going to talk through called Upstream by Dan Heath. I first read this book back in 2020 at the start of the pandemic. I was actually painting my son's playroom at the time, and when I was painting, I actually had to stop multiple times while listening to the audiobook to write down different nuggets of wisdom I was getting from the book. One key theme was that really resonated with me, which was to solve problems before they become problems. And that's very counterintuitive to our society in general. So it was very helpful for me. One thing I really prescribe to is something that Benjamin Franklin said once, which is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What I mean by that is think about your teeth. We allocate twice a day to prevent cavities and other nasty stuff from happening to our teeth, but we often forget to do other things that are just as easy and effective to managing our health. To start the book off, one of the stories I really enjoyed and it really helped me understand what Upstream is all about was a parable of 2 men where there were some kids that are drowning in a river. The 2 men were jumping in to save the kids multiple times, and each time a new kid was thrown into the stream and was drowning. Finally, one of the adults stopped, walked away. The other adult was asking, "Hey, where are you going?" "I'm gonna go upstream to try to find who is throwing kids into the water and stop them from doing it." A lot of times it's about understanding not the problem that's in front of you, but what's really causing the problem. So this is a very good parable to understand what the general concept of this book will be about. So I'm going to talk through 3 key items from this book. Number 1, there is no glory in defense. Because similar to defense in badminton, it is not sexy, but it's absolute necessary to be successful. So what do I mean by there's no glory? A lot of times there's no accolades that are related to things that you fix before they even become a problem, because there's no tangible way to look at it. It's the same thing in badminton doubles. Attack usually wins the point about 60% of the time. And so it tends to be the area that people focus on the most and get the most prestige and see the most impact from. So unfortunately, heroism is celebrated and encouraged across our society, which honestly is more reactionary, but it has a tangible savings or a way to calculate an ROI. So secondly, if the problem never comes to be, how can an ROI even be calculated? What is the reward of solving a problem before it becomes a problem? My answer to this is simple, and this is not something I got from the book, but this is something I think about when I solve problems before they become problems, and I build good structures, which is you will gain clarity. I think of it as the cognitive load of driving. Think about it this way. If you were driving in an area where you're not as familiar and there's a lot of traffic, you're going to be overwhelmed. But if you know the area pretty well and there's little traffic, you plan ahead, you're going to be able to clearly focus on other things. This is what resonates with me to understand how creating and solving problems and systems to solve those problems is very important. Number 2, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it's actually getting. So in the book, they talk about Expedia as an example. where they talk about people wanting to print out their itinerary. So that's why they actually called in. They were calling in to get a copy of their itinerary. It didn't get to their email or whatever it may be. Nobody was really looking into this. This particular issue cost the company $100 million. Simply because people were so focused on serving their specific area and failed to look at the bigger picture. Each of those individual groups had a KPI that they were trying to solve for, and they were all successful at it. So, why would all these people be calling in for their itinerary? Nobody asked that. Are the emails going to spam? Is there some other issue at play? So simply, what is the key problem here so we can resolve it, and in the end, have the result that the call volume goes down? The question asked from an upstream perspective is simply, why are people calling, and how do we reduce that volume? Downstream within the customer group, they were looking at their scripts and programs and customer service scores, and they were celebrating their victories. But again, as I mentioned, there was a larger problem at play here that none of them were aware of. So you must have a strategic or a first principles kind of thinking. So in short, you need to solve for the behaviors at the root and not just look at the outcomes, the end results. Number 3, look at what behaviors we're incentivizing. I remember something that my old MBA finance professor, Jim Mahar, taught me, which you can check out his video above. He introduced the concept of nexus of contracts to me when I was taking my MBA finance class. In his example, he used a company and its employees, its managers, its debt holders, shareholders, and suppliers. He broke down the incentive and contract structures between each of them and how they were interrelated and how these different incentives would determine the different types of behavior. I'll give you a real example of this. For example, we had the Cobra effect, which happened many years ago in India. There was a program that they gave money for snakes. Unfortunately, people got pretty smart with this and decided to breed snakes. So when the government got wind of this, they stopped giving the incentive, which led to them having more snakes than what they originally started with. A second example is if you reward executives with stock options, while normal employees, you just give them bonuses or just stock, you will see informational asymmetries happen on when the timing of negative news would be released to coincide with beneficial situations for executives. This does happen and still happens to this day, which honestly it shouldn't, but how can you truly solve for this? Again, there's an incentive to cheat. Even with the stout penalties, you see that this even in our own government, where wives or family members or other relatives of these high-ranking government officials are trading on this information, and they're hoping that they won't get caught. But they stand to gain millions of dollars. Incentives are a very interesting topic, and they can cause a lot of upstream dynamic changes, which can have long-lasting downstream results. I won't get into all the details of this book. I really feel like this is a book that you should definitely read, but I do have a visual that will summarize some of the key items in this book to make it easier to follow along. So the first thing to remember is that there's 3 barriers to overcome. One is problem blindness, which is just, I don't see the problem, or it just seems inevitable. It's just gonna happen. Number 2 is a lack of ownership. That's not my problem to solve. Nobody's really owning it. A good example was the Expedia example. Number 3 is tunneling. I can't deal with that right now. You're so focused on the problems right in front of you that you can't solve for the bigger problem. Those are the 3 barriers that you need to overcome. And there's 7 key questions you should try to be asking yourself. So the first question would be is how to unite the right people. So this is surrounding the problem with the right people and using data for learnings. Second would be is how to change the system. As we mentioned earlier, the system is going to behave and get the result that it was designed for. Number 3 is where to find a point of leverage. Number 4 would be how to get an early warning system on the problem. Number 5 is how to know you're succeeding. What KPIs, what measures will you have to know what success looks like? Number 6 is how to avoid doing harm. And number 7 is who will pay for what doesn't happen. This is about aligning incentives, which is number 3, what we talked about earlier, and trying to understand nexus of contracts and how incentives work. So in conclusion, here are a couple things I learned from this personally. Number 1 is to question things. Healthy skepticism, or using the Socratic method, is very helpful. Socrates was once considered the smartest man in Athens simply because he could admit ignorancy and would question others to learn what he did not know. And for some people, I'm sure that was annoying, but he just was wanting to learn and understand. Number 2, make small shifts or adjustments and get feedback. This is an iterative process many times when you're doing things. There is no reason to make giant changes. Often you just need to tweak the formula and just see what results you get. Number 3 is gain a better perspective or view. It's kind of related to number 2, but it's slightly different because how I think of this being different is how do you pull yourself out of the situation that you're in, bring yourself up to a higher level to truly see what's going on. Sometimes you need to pull yourself out or have somebody else pull you out to understand what's truly going on. Number 4 is to understand clearly the difference between upstream and downstream thinking. So upstream would be preventing the problem. Downstream would be reacting to the problem. Upstream would be cannot see the impact, it's not tangible. Downstream, it's tangible to see, it's something that has an outcome. Upstream, understand the purpose. Downstream, it's easier to measure. Upstream, it's a system thinking. Downstream, it's thinking in isolation. Upstream, source, prevention focus. Downstream, symptom and response focus. I hope that was helpful for you guys. Those are the key things that I took out of this book. And if you want to check out the book, I recommend getting it on Audible or getting it on a Kindle reader. It was an awesome book and I really enjoyed it. Take care, guys.